Alice woke up to a strange sound. It was not the usual noise of the night city, not the hum of cars or even the rustle of the wind outside the window. It was a scream. Muffled, distorted, like someone was trying to scream but couldn't. She sat up on the bed, listened. Silence, only the clatter of the clock on the wall. "I was dreaming," Alice mumbled, pulling back the blanket. But as soon as she took a step toward the door, the sound came again. Only now it was closer. Alice froze. A chill ran down her spine. She lived alone. It wasn't the TV. It wasn't the neighbors. The sound was coming directly from her apartment. She cautiously approached the door to the living room and slowly opened it. No one was in the room. Moonlight fell on the floor, outlining the shadows of the furniture. Everything looked the same as it did before she went to sleep. Except for one thing. There was an old tape recorder on the floor, right in the middle of the room. She didn't remember seeing it before. It was covered in a layer of dust, with a cracked play button. And it was on. Swallowing hard, Alice took a step forward and bent down to pick it up. It was still recording. She pressed stop, then pressed play with bated breath. There was a scraping sound in the speaker, like something rustling in the darkness. Then, breathing, intermittent, hoarse. And then, a scream. But it wasn't an ordinary scream. It sounded like it was coming from a man who had no mouth. Muffled, distorted, heartbreaking. And then, in the midst of that horror, there was a whisper. "You're next." Alice shrieked and dropped the recorder. The recording stopped. The room was quiet again. But before she could catch her breath, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Someone was in her apartment. Alice froze. The footsteps in the hallway were slow, unnatural, as if someone was moving, not quite knowing how to control their body. The floorboards creaked, the sound growing closer. She slowly backed up until her back was against the wall. The door was only 2 meters away, but as soon as she moved, the footsteps stopped too. It was as if someone was waiting. Alice held her breath, trying to convince herself it was just a neighbor's noise. But the tape recorder, the recording, that voice. "You're next." Quietly, almost silently, she slid her hand along the wall, found the light switch, and turned the light on sharply. There was no one in the hallway. But the bathroom door was open. Alice knew for a fact that she had closed it before she went to bed. She took a step forward. The light in the hallway flickered, blurring the shadows. Silence pressed on her ears, as if the whole world had frozen. And then she saw it. A mirror. There was something written on it. Not blood, not lipstick's fingernails. Deep scratches dashed across the glass, folding into an ominous inscription. "They saw me." Alice felt a chill gripping her entire body. Who saw me?" Her voice trembled. As if in response, something rustled behind her back. She turned around and saw her reflection in the mirror. But it wasn't her. Her doppelganger stood in the mirror, but without a mouth. A muffled, garbled scream filled the bathroom. Alice wanted to scream, but the sound stuck in her throat. Her reflection didn't move as she did. It was looking directly at her, but its lips were compressed into an unnatural curve as if its mouth had disappeared, leaving only smooth skin. But that wasn't the worst part. It was trying to scream. She could hear the scream muffled, heartbreaking, as if coming from the void. Its head was twitching in spasms, its hands clawing at the glass inside. Then it took a step forward, straight toward her. Alice recoiled, grabbing the first thing at hand, in a panic, a glass of toothbrushes. Without thinking, she threw it at the mirror with all her might. The glass exploded into 1,000 shards. The room was filled with a deafening sound, as if dozens of voices were screaming in agony at the same time. Alice covered her ears and huddled in a corner, feeling the small glass shards digging into her skin. But suddenly everything went quiet. She slowly unclenched her eyes. The mirror was gone. In its place was a dark gaping hole, like a passage to another dimension. And from there, someone was looking. Someone's long, curved fingers slowly reached out of the darkness. And then she heard his voice. "You're with us now." Silhouettes began to emerge from the hole in the wall, pale, featureless figures with smooth skin instead of mouths. They pulled their hands toward her, their screams shuddering in the air like distorted waves of radio static. Alice shrieked and rushed for the exit. But the door, it was no longer there. The walls of the room were now covered in mirrors. And in every reflection, she saw them. The faceless dead. Alice spun in place, looking around the room in a panic. Mirrors were everywhere. Instead of walls, instead of a door, just endless reflections. And in each of them. Faceless silhouettes wriggled in contorted poses, their screams resounding despite the absence of mouths. A deafening, heartbreaking howl filled the space, making the blood run cold in his veins. "Wake up!" A voice sounded in her head, as if someone was speaking directly into her consciousness. Who are you?" Alice slumped into a corner, feeling her legs shaking with terror. The mirrors shook, the reflections began to blur, and amidst the chaos, one figure stepped forward. She was taller than the others, her skin seemed gray, dead, and despite the absence of a mouth, Alice could feel it smiling. "We are the ones who were not heard. We are the ones who cried out, but no one came." The creature took a step forward, its fingers, long and bony, reached for Alice. She tried to scream, but the sound stuck in her throat. "You're going to be one of us, too." Her body became paralyzed, the world around her shook, reflections cracked, and out of each crack crawled new hands, new faceless dead men. Alice felt her lips begin to disappear. She touched her face. The mouth was no longer there. She wanted to scream, but dead people without mouths. They screamed too. Alice was falling. Her body plunged into endless darkness, and the mirrors around her shattered like pieces of shattered reality. Muffled screams tore through space, but she couldn't utter them. Her mouth no longer existed. In the last glimmer of light, she saw herself, a mirrored reflection, standing in an ordinary room, mouth open, eyes widened with terror. But now it was on the other side of the mirror. Alice wanted to reach out, to try to pull herself back in, but her fingers only slid across the smooth surface. In her former room, on the other side, the other Alice approached the mirror and smiled. She could speak. She was free. Alice huddled within the walls of her prison, pressing her palms into the glass. She begged for help. But no one would hear. Because dead people with no mouths. They screamed too.